Welcome back to the Fulton County Gospel News Podcast. My name is Barry Odell, and I am your host. Fulton County Gospel News is a bi-monthly publication of the Church of Christ in Mammoth Spring, Arkansas. And if you'd like to learn more about the paper, visit our website, mammothspringchurchofchrist.com, and you can get a hold of us through our contact information. You can receive the paper as a PDF in your email, or you can receive hard copies of the paper either as an individual, or you can receive a bundle of the papers through the United States Postal Service, and then you can hand them out. Let us know what we can do for you, and we'll be happy to add you to one of our mailing lists. Today I want to share with you an article from the December 1964 edition of the paper, and the title of the article is The One-Talent Man. Now I have my Bible open to Matthew chapter 25 because that is where the parable of the talents is found, Matthew 25 verses 14 to 30. But again, the article is titled The One-Talent Man, and it was written by Richard England. The parable of the talents is one with which all of us are familiar. It is recorded in Matthew 25, 14 through 30. That a man who would fit into the category of this one-talent man cannot be well-pleasing to God and Jesus Christ is obvious. But looking at him as many people look at themselves, we might find many things which could be said for him. The one-talent man was certainly no thief. That which was committed to his trust was returned to the master after carefully keeping it in the earth so that none could take it from him. This one-talent man was not careless with the money entrusted to him. He did not spend it in riotous living or gambling. In comparison to the other two men mentioned in the parable, he was somewhat the underdog in that he did not have the means to perform and gain as much as the others. Yet he verily displeased his master and pictures to us the type of people who are displeasing to Jesus Christ. Jesus said of this man that he was wicked and slothful. The man as a servant, one who is obligated to perform tasks for his master, the master had given him responsibility. He had received power to perform and had not performed. He had not acted as one engaged in the service of another, but as one who had no time to spend for another. He had acted out of fear for his own self and life. He was not interested in promoting the good of his master, but of saving his own life. In this his attitude was evil, and the motive was laziness. If we are to be well-pleasing to God, we must learn the lesson presented in this parable. To each of us has been given power to perform. We have been given obligations as servants. We are not our own, but we belong to God. In that we cannot all accomplish as much as others, we are not excused from doing that which we can. To be pleasing to God is more than refraining from certain evils. It is also actively participating in that which He has commanded that we do. We must perform tasks for which we are suited. A failure to do so, even though we may not be participating in the many evil activities of the world, will bring to us eternal condemnation. I suppose there are a lot of directions that I could take this when I'm thinking about some of the things that the author brought out in this article. But again, Matthew 25, 14 through 30, and I'm not going to read all of this, but it lays this parable out for us, and the concept behind that parable is just that: be productive. And so the image is of this man who travels into a far country, and he has some servants, and the text says in Matthew 25 and verse 14 that to his servants he delivered his goods. Okay, so these guys were not handling their own stuff. They were dealing with the stuff of somebody else. And then it says this in verse 15, to each according to his own ability. Now, if we understand this parable properly, we know that this one who went into the far country is Jesus Christ, but we also know by that statement in verse 16, to each according to his own ability, we know about the justice of Jesus Christ, and in the sense of He doesn't require of us what we cannot do. God and His Son, they do not require the impossible. Now, what they do require, and I think one of the main points of this parable, is faithfulness. That's what they require. They require action. In fact, when you look at the results after the master has come back, when he deals with the 5-talent man, verse 21, he says, well done, good and faithful servant. Good, the Greek word means either profitable or useful, and faithful means trustworthy. Well, see, that's what God expects of us. He expects us to be profitable or useful for Him and worthy of trust. Well, then what are the results of being trustworthy and profitable? It's this: you've been faithful over a few things, I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. And so that same thing was said to the 2-talent man in verses 22 and 23. Now, when you get to the 1-talent man, and again, that's the main aim of this article, it's interesting to note the misconceptions that the 1-talent man had about his master that apparently the others didn't have about him. Matthew 25:24, he said, "Lord, I knew you to be a hard man." Well, that's wrong. When you go back to verse 15 again, he distributed to each one according to his own ability. Now, a hard man would have required things that the people couldn't do, but that's not the character of this Lord. And then we see in verse 25 that he was afraid and went and hid your talent. Again, it's interesting because typically when people think about those who are going to hell or those who are going to be separated from God for all eternity are wicked people. And you could list any number of sins, I suppose. But when you consider what happens here, you have fear. And Jesus' response to that in verse 26 is, "You wicked and lazy servant." See, I don't think that God classifies sin as we do, as really, really big sin and, well, not such big sin and not so bad. Sin is sin, and to fail to act in accordance with the will of God is just that. It makes you wicked, and it makes you lazy. The New King James says lazy. The King James, I think, says slothful. So here's what you should have done, verse 27. "You ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received my own with interest." Okay, in other words, do what you can. Do something. But he decided to do nothing. And then we have this principle stated in Matthew 25, beginning in verse 28. "So take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So the start there, verse 29, for everyone who has, more will be given. I suppose you've heard that concept of if you have something that you need to be done, talk to the busiest person you know. And the concept is those who are busy, those who are active and involved get things done. And the fact of the matter is this: the more faithful and involved we are in our service to God, the more opportunities we will have to do just that, to be faithful and involved in the work of God. And so you don't have to be a wicked and evil committer of sin. You don't have to be an adulterer or a fornicator or a murderer to lose your soul. You can just do nothing with the responsibilities that you've been given, and you'll be cast into outer darkness. I suppose it's easy, and I've seen this over the years, for people to, I guess you would say, excuse themselves from any service to God because they consider themselves like the 1-talent man. Well, I just really can't do anything, but I don't want to lose what you gave me. So for me today to think about this application, this is like the Christian who does the absolute, what they consider to be the absolute bare minimum in faithfulness to God. And typically what that means is they'll show up to church on Sunday. In my mind, that's the 1-talent man. I'm not really letting go of everything, but I'm not going to do much of anything. And so I'll just show up and be here. I think when you look at Matthew 25, and particularly verses 24 through 26, I think we learn God's view of that. Lord, I knew you were hard, you required a whole lot, and I was afraid. I didn't want to lose anything, but I really didn't want to push the envelope. God's view of that is, you wicked and lazy servant. See, ultimately, that's a reflection on the character of God, that the idea that He requires of us more than we can do, and not only that, that when we get to judgment, that His judgment will be unjust. And none of that's true of God. Now, God does require things of us. There's no question about that. But He doesn't require of us what we cannot do. He does not require the impossible. He requires faithfulness. So I guess I would summarize it like this. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 2 that what God requires is faithfulness in a steward. And a steward is one who's been entrusted with someone else's goods, and that's what we see in the parable of the talents. 2 men decided to be faithful, 1 man decided to be unfaithful, and each of us has to make that decision for ourselves. Don't be the one-talent man. Well, thanks for listening today to this episode of the Fulton County Gospel News podcast. If you've not done so yet, subscribe to our channel on Podbean, and you can interact with each episode and get notifications when a new one comes out. Again, if you'd like to subscribe to our paper, visit our website, MammothSpringChurchOfChrist.com. Get a hold of us, and we'll be happy to add you to our mailing list. So thanks again for listening today, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fulton County Gospel News podcast.